Beneath the damp earth, where silence has lingered for 1,000 years, a whisper stirs. It is not the wind. It is not the soil. It is the echo of a life broken and buried. The archaeologists uncovered her carefully, a woman, her bones twisted, her jaw clenched as if frozen mid-scream. Around her neck, iron clasps. Across her ribs, marks carved deep into the very bone. What story does this grave tell? Was she a wife? A mother? A daughter torn from her home? Or was she a nameless captive, one of many carried across the sea in the belly of a longship? The soil yields no voice, but the scars speak. The bones tell us she suffered. And the truth, hidden in fragments of blood and ash, is darker than the sagas ever dared to sing. We are taught to imagine Vikings as warriors, fierce, proud, brutal. But in the shadows of their raids lies a secret too haunting to ignore. Because what Vikings did to women was not just violence. It was a system. It was an economy. It was a darkness so vast that even today, its remnants cling to the DNA of nations. What happened to her? What happened to the hundreds, the thousands like her? Stay with me, because the truth that lies buried in these graves will change the way you see history forever. Before we open the next chapter of this haunting story, take a moment to join our journey here on Cursed Chronicles. Subscribe now, and in the comments, tell us where in the world you are watching from. Because together, we're unearthing the stories history tried to bury. We often imagine Viking women as shield maidens, fierce warriors standing shoulder to shoulder with men on the battlefield. Stories in modern films give us heroines with braids flowing, swords raised, unbreakable in spirit. But the truth buried in chronicles and archaeological finds tells us something far more unsettling. For every woman who carried a blade, there were countless others carried away as spoils of war. When Viking ships cut through the mist and struck at monasteries and villages, the first cries heard were not of steel clashing, but of women dragged from their homes. The Irish annals speak of entire convents emptied in a single night. Anglo-Saxon chronicles describe raiders tearing through coastal settlements, leaving nothing but fire, smoke, and silence, and women taken in chains. The Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan, writing of the Norse he encountered, recorded not only their brutal rituals, but the way they treated women as possessions, valued less for their humanity than for their use in trade, pleasure, or labor. To the Vikings, women were central to life, as wives, mothers, keepers of farms, weavers of cloth, tellers of stories. But when the longships landed on foreign shores, women became another kind of wealth. They were counted like livestock, traded like silver. In the sagas, the voices of women are often silenced, their fates spoken only in passing, yet the ground remembers. Shackles unearthed in Dublin's slave markets, bones with marks of binding, and graves that reveal women buried without honor. All of these whisper that for many, Viking conquest was not glory but terror. This duality is the heart of the story. Women were both the foundation of Viking society and the victims of its hunger for expansion. They bore children who carried Norse bloodlines into the future, yet many of them were not given a choice. Some were wives in name only, taken from their lands and folded into households where their silence was demanded. If you're just joining us on Cursed Chronicles, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It helps us bring these hidden stories to more people. When Viking sails appeared on the horizon, villages did not just fear the loss of gold or livestock. The true wealth sought by the raiders was human. Women were the prize that fueled an underground economy stretching from the coasts of Ireland to the markets of the East. In the darkness of night, doors were splintered, children torn from their mothers' arms, and women bound in ropes or iron shackles. The longships that cut silently across the seas were not filled only with plundered treasure. They carried voices muffled by fear, captives pressed together in silence, their futures traded before they even reached the shore. Archaeologists digging in Dublin have uncovered more than soil. They unearthed the foundations of fortified enclosures, heavy chains, and locks, evidence that this city was once among the largest slave markets of the Viking world. Women and children were bought and sold here as though they were cattle, their worth measured in silver, weapons, or grain. Shackles sized for small wrists and ankles tell of the very young, while the remnants of fortified pens whisper of lives reduced to property. Economics turned cruelty into structure. A woman could be sold at market, traded as a concubine, or forced into a household as a servant or wife. To the Vikings, captives were not just victims of war, they were investments. Records suggest that in some places, women were worth more than gold. their ability to bear children seen as a way to expand bloodlines and strengthen settlements. Behind every raid, beneath the smoke of burning towns, there was calculation. Not simply to seize wealth, but to seize life itself. Picture the journey. A longship cuts through black waves, the oars rising and falling with perfect rhythm. At its heart, bound captives huddle together, the salt wind biting their faces, their eyes fixed on nothing, for they do not know where they are being taken. Some would never see their homelands again. Some would vanish into strange cities, nameless and forgotten. This hidden economy of bodies is rarely spoken of in the heroic sagas, yet it is written into the bones buried in foreign soil, and in the genetic traces scattered across the north. Behind the legends of warriors lies the reality of women carried away as living spoils. If this shocks you, drop a like. It tells us to keep uncovering these darker truths of history. Life as a captive woman in the Viking Age was not marked by chains alone. It was marked by the slow erosion of identity, of freedom, of self. Once torn from their villages, many women were thrust into a world where their past names, families, and faiths mattered little. They were absorbed into households where every glance was measured, every step watched, and every silence demanded. Some were forced into servitude, tending fires, weaving cloth, grinding grain from dawn until nightfall, their labor unending. Others were taken as concubines, kept not out of affection but out of ownership, their bodies seen as extensions of power. The sagas hint at this reality in subtle lines. A woman passed between men as part of an inheritance, or spoken of as a gift to seal an alliance. To the reader, it may seem like background detail, but to the woman, it was life itself, written in chains. Archaeology deepens the shadows of these stories. In graves uncovered across Scandinavia, researchers have found women buried with tools of domestic servitude, looms, spindle whorls, cooking instruments. But alongside them, there are darker signs, iron shackles buried with the dead, bones showing signs of malnutrition and violence. These were not honored wives resting in peace. They were women whose suffering followed them even into death. Imagine the fear that hung in the air of a longhouse. The crackle of fire in the hearth, the shadows moving across the timbered walls. A woman kneels to serve, her eyes lowered. Her children, if she bore them, would not carry her name. They would be absorbed into the household of her captor, their identities rewritten, their mother's past erased. And yet, in the quiet of night, perhaps she whispered old songs in a tongue her captors could not understand, songs that carried fragments of her lost home, fragments of who she once was. Some women were forced into marriages, paraded as symbols of conquest. They stood beside men who had once been their captors, compelled to smile at feasts while their hearts remembered only grief. The line between wife and prisoner was blurred by law and custom, and many endured a life that was neither one nor the other. Their bodies bore the weight of children born not of choice, but of coercion, their futures bound to lands they had never chosen to see. And yet, within this darkness, there were also acts of quiet defiance. A poisoned cup slipped into a hand, a secret escape under cover of night, a refusal to be broken even when every chain pressed down. These acts were rarely recorded in the Chronicles of Kings, but they flicker through the sagas as whispers, shadows of women who would not surrender fully, even in captivity. It is in these details that we see the true legacy of what Vikings did to women. The sagas celebrate raids and conquests, but the real story is one of countless women enduring lives of fear, labor, and silence. A silence so heavy it echoes still in the graves and in the genetic lines they left behind. If this part of history feels heavier than the tales you've heard before, stay with us. And if you believe these forgotten voices deserve to be remembered, let us know by subscribing to Cursed Chronicles. Leave a comment below with where in the world you're watching from. Together, we carry these stories across time, so they are never buried again. Not every woman taken into Viking captivity remained silent. In the shadows of longhouses and in the margins of sagas, there are glimpses of defiance, fragments of stories where women pushed back against the systems that sought to consume them. Though the sources are scarce and often filtered through the voices of men, what remains suggests a truth that is both haunting and extraordinary. Even in the darkest places, resistance burned. Legends speak of Gunhild, a queen remembered both as a witch and as a cunning strategist. To some, she was the mother of kings; to others, a woman who bent fate itself through her will. While the sagas exaggerate, twisting fact with myth, they reveal how women could wield influence not through sword and shield, but through knowledge, manipulation, and an understanding of human weakness. Whether or not Gunhild's tales are literal, they embody the spirit of women who refused to remain passive. Beyond legend, there were acts of quiet sabotage. Archaeological evidence shows that poison played a role in feasting rituals, traces of toxic herbs like henbane found in drinking vessels. It does not take much imagination to see how a woman, forced to serve wine or ale to her captors, might use that role to strike back. A cup placed carefully into the wrong hand, a draught that burned not with warmth but with death. These were acts carried out not on the battlefield, but in kitchens, feasting halls, and the private spaces of power. Some resisted by running. The sagas speak of thralls, enslaved men and women, who fled into the forests, carving out fragile freedoms beyond the reach of their masters. To vanish into the wilderness was perilous, yet the choice to risk death rather than endure bondage speaks to a spirit unbroken. Each escape was a rebellion against the economy of captivity that the Vikings had built. There are stories, too, of women who used words as weapons. In Icelandic sagas, we find examples of wives and concubines who whispered truths at the right moment, steering decisions, planting seeds of discord that unraveled alliances. Their power was subtle, often overlooked, but no less real. In societies where violence was a man's tool, influence through speech and cunning became a woman's means of survival and defiance. The genetic record tells its own tale of resistance. In Iceland, studies reveal that much of the maternal ancestry traces back to Celtic women, not Norse. This suggests that women carried from lands like Ireland and Scotland did not simply vanish into obscurity. They survived, bore children, and imprinted their identities into the very bloodlines of Scandinavia. Even when stripped of names, they shaped the generations that followed. Their presence in the DNA is a silent rebellion against erasure. One cannot overlook the psychological resistance, the preservation of memory. Imagine a woman, taken far from home, forced into a foreign household. By day she labors, by night she sits at the hearth with children on her lap. In the quiet, she sings songs in her native tongue, passing down fragments of her lost culture. Those children may grow to speak Norse, to live as part of the new world, but hidden in their lullabies and prayers are echoes of the mother's homeland. This, too, was survival, a refusal to let memory be stolen. And sometimes resistance was not subtle at all. Accounts from the Irish Chronicles speak of women captured during raids who chose death over slavery, throwing themselves into rivers or fires rather than be taken. At Repton, graves have yielded evidence of mass poisonings. Cups lined with mercury, suggesting that entire groups of women may have ended their lives rather than endure what awaited them. Such choices, though tragic, were acts of defiance, declarations that even in chains, the final choice belonged to them. Taken together, these fragments reveal a story far more complex than silence and submission. Women resisted in ways large and small, through escape, through poison, through cunning words, through memory, through the children they bore and the cultures they preserved. They shaped the Viking world not only as victims, but as agents of change, leaving behind a legacy that endures long after the names of their captors have faded. The Viking world was built on conquest, but conquest breeds enemies, and oppression carries within it the seeds of its own collapse. For generations, the raiders struck villages and monasteries, carrying away women as trophies and commodities. Yet over time, the resistance of those women, subtle, quiet, relentless, began to leave cracks in the system that seemed unshakable. Every poisoned cup at a feast weakened trust. Every whisper in a chieftain's hall planted doubt among allies. Every escape into the forests chipped away at the certainty that captives could be controlled forever. In the hidden economy of flesh and fear, even the smallest acts of defiance spread like fire through dry grass. By the late Viking Age, power began to shift. The markets in Dublin faltered under the pressure of raids, uprisings, and shifting alliances. Some settlements that once thrived on the trade of human lives fell into ruin, their walls crumbling into the earth. Archaeologists uncover them today not as monuments of triumph, but as reminders of how quickly wealth built on suffering can vanish. The legacy of those women, however, did not vanish. Their presence lingers in the very bloodlines of Scandinavia. Genetic studies show that in Iceland, the maternal ancestry is overwhelmingly Celtic, not Norse. This is no accident. It is the mark of countless women carried across seas, whose descendants became the backbone of new societies. In Norway and Denmark, too, traces of foreign mothers endure. Their voices may have been silenced in life, but in blood they continue to speak. And beyond the science, there is memory. The lullabies whispered in foreign tongues, the stories passed down in secret, the fragments of culture carried in kitchens, songs, and prayers. These became threads woven into the fabric of Northern Europe. It was through memory that women denied freedom claimed immortality. What Vikings did to women was not just violence, not just conquest. It was an attempt to control life itself. Yet even within that darkness, the women they sought to break found ways to endure. Some resisted openly, others quietly, but all left marks so deep that we can still trace them 1,000 years later. History often celebrates the warriors, the kings, the raiders who set fire to coastlines. But the truer story lies in the shadows, in the bones of the nameless, in the blood of descendants, in the echoes of voices that refuse to be erased. And it is those voices that haunt us still. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, take a moment now. Like this video so others can discover it. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss the truths buried beneath the surface of history. And in the comments, tell us where in the world you're watching from, because the story of these women belongs not just to one land, but to all of us.